The orc woman's fingers trembled as she stood at the altar, her green skin gleaming with nervous perspiration under the late afternoon sun that filtered through the trees. Grika had never imagined she would be here, dressed in rough cloth that someone had attempted to fashion into something resembling a bridal garment, standing across from a human man whose calloused hands held hers with unexpected gentleness. 3 months ago, she had been a warrior in the Blacktooth clan, one of the fiercest orc tribes that roamed the northern mountains. Her life had been battle training, hunting expeditions, and the constant struggle to prove herself worthy in a society that measured value in strength and brutality. Her mother had died when she was young, leaving her to be raised by her father, a hardened warrior who believed affection made soldiers weak. He had never hugged her, never praised her except to grunt approval when she landed a particularly vicious blow during sparring. The other orcs treated her with cold efficiency, using her as they would any weapon, sharp and necessary, but requiring no tenderness. When she failed to kill a human child during a raid on a frontier settlement, her father had looked at her with disgust. The child had been crying, clutching a wooden doll, and something in Grika's chest had twisted painfully. She had lowered her blade, and that single moment of mercy had sealed her fate. Her father had declared her weak, corrupted by human softness, and the clan had cast her out with nothing but the clothes on her back and the weapons she carried. For weeks she had wandered the wilderness, alone and desperate. The other orc clans would not accept an exile, and humans would kill her on sight. She survived on what she could hunt, growing thinner and more desperate as the days passed. When she finally collapsed from hunger and exhaustion near a small farmstead, she had expected to die there in the dirt, unmourned and forgotten. Instead, she had woken in a barn, lying on clean straw with a blanket covering her. A man with sandy brown hair and worried gray eyes had been sitting nearby, and when he saw her stir, he had not reached for a weapon. Instead, he had offered her water. "Easy now," he had said, his voice gentle in a way that made her flinch. "You have been unconscious for 2 days. I found you at the edge of my wheat field." Grika had tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. The man, who introduced himself as Warren Redfield, had helped her drink, supporting her head with one hand while holding the cup with the other. The simple kindness of the gesture had shocked her more than any blow she had ever received in combat. "Why?" she had rasped when she could finally form words. "Why not kill me?" Warren had looked at her with those calm gray eyes and said something that would echo in her mind for weeks to come. "Because you were dying, and I am not in the habit of letting things die when I can help them live." That had been the beginning. Warren was a widower who lived alone on his farm, working the land his father had left him. His wife had died in childbirth 3 years prior, along with their unborn son, and the grief had carved lines into his face that made him look older than his 28 years. He was a quiet man, methodical and patient, and he seemed unbothered by Grika's presence even though harboring an orc could get him killed if anyone discovered her. For the first few days, Grika had remained in the barn, too weak to do more than sit up. Warren brought her food 3 times a day, simple fare like bread and stew, but to Grika it was a feast. He never demanded anything from her, never asked for payment or service. When she tried to thank him, he simply nodded and went about his work. As her strength returned, Grika began to observe Warren more closely. He rose before dawn every morning to tend to his chickens and milk his 2 cows. He spent long hours in his fields, repairing fences and tending to the crops that would see him through winter. In the evenings, he would sit outside the barn and whittle small figures from wood, his hands moving with practiced ease. One evening, As the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Warren had brought her dinner and sat down on a bale of hay nearby. Grika had been sitting against the barn wall, her legs pulled up to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible. "You do not have to hide yourself," Warren had said quietly. "This is my land, and no one comes here without my knowing." Grika had looked at him, studying his weathered face. "You are not afraid of me. Should I be? I am an orc. Your people kill mine on sight." Warren had nodded slowly. "And your people kill mine. But you are not raiding my farm and I am not hunting you. We are just two people trying to survive, seems to me." The simplicity of his logic had disarmed her completely. In her clan, everything was about dominance and submission, strength and weakness. The idea that two beings could simply exist alongside each other without one ruling the other was foreign to her. "What do you want from me?" she had asked, suspicion creeping into her voice despite herself. Warren had looked surprised. "Want from you? Nothing. Though if you are feeling better, I would not say no to some help around the farm. These old bones are not what they used to be." He was not old at all, but Grika understood he was making a joke, trying to put her at ease. She had nodded stiffly. "I can work. I am strong." "I do not doubt it," Warren had said with a small smile. "But first, you need to finish getting your strength back. Another few days of rest should do it." That night, Grika had lain awake for hours, staring at the barn roof and trying to understand this strange human who showed her kindness without expecting anything in return. In her experience, every action had a price. Every gesture of goodwill was a manipulation waiting to be revealed. But as the days passed and Warren continued to treat her with the same quiet respect, she began to wonder if perhaps the world was larger and stranger than her clan had taught her. When she finally felt strong enough to work, Grika threw herself into the farm tasks with fierce determination. She mucked out the animal stalls, hauled water from the well, and helped Warren repair a section of fence that had been damaged by a recent storm. Her orcish strength made many tasks easier, and she took satisfaction in seeing Warren's surprised pleasure at how much they could accomplish together. "You are a hard worker," he had commented one afternoon as they took a break in the shade of his small farmhouse. He had offered her a cup of cool water from his well, and she had accepted it gratefully. "I do not know how to be anything else," Grika had replied honestly. Warren had studied her for a moment, and she had felt oddly exposed under his gaze, as if he could see past her tough exterior to the confused, lonely creature beneath. "There is no shame in resting sometimes. The world will still be here when you are done." Grika had not known how to respond to that, so she had simply nodded and taken another drink of water. The silence between them was comfortable, and she realized with a start that she had not felt this peaceful in years, perhaps ever. As summer progressed into early autumn, a routine developed. Grika slept in the barn but spent her days working alongside Warren. He taught her about farming, explaining the cycles of planting and harvest with the patience of a born teacher. She, in turn, shared some of her knowledge of the wilderness, pointing out edible plants and showing him how to track game more efficiently. One morning, as they worked together to harvest the wheat, Warren's hand had brushed against hers as they both reached for the same sheaf. The contact had sent a jolt through Grika's body, and she had jerked away as if burned. Warren had looked at her with concern, but he had not commented on her reaction. That night, Grika had lain awake again, but this time her thoughts were different. She found herself remembering small details about Warren. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the careful precision of his hands when he worked, the low rumble of his voice when he spoke. These observations troubled her deeply because she recognized them for what they were. She was developing feelings for this human, feelings that went far beyond gratitude or friendship. The realization terrified her. Not only were such feelings forbidden by every law of her former clan, but they seemed impossible to act upon. Warren had shown her kindness, but that did not mean he viewed her as anything more than a peculiar farmhand. She was an orc, green-skinned and tusked, built for battle rather than romance. What could she possibly offer to a man who had lost a wife he clearly still mourned? Grika tried to bury these feelings, throwing herself even harder into her work. But Warren seemed to sense her turmoil, and one evening he approached her with a gentle expression that made her heart ache. "Grika," he had said softly, and the sound of her name in his mouth was like honey. "You have been avoiding me. Have I done something to offend you?" "No," she had said quickly, too quickly. "You have been nothing but kind." "Then what troubles you? You can tell me, you know. I may not have all the answers, but I am a good listener." Grika had looked at him then, really looked at him, and something inside her had cracked open. Before she could stop herself, the words came tumbling out. "No one ever spoke soft to me before, not once in my whole life. Every word I heard was harsh, every touch was rough. You treat me like I matter, like I am more than just a weapon or a burden. I do not know how to bear it." Warren's expression had softened even further, and he had taken a step closer. "You do matter, Grika. You matter very much." "Why?" she had demanded, her voice breaking. "Why do you care about an orc exile? I am nothing. My own people threw me away." "Then your people are fools," Warren had said with surprising fierceness. "You are brave and strong and kind. I have seen the way you gentle the animals, how you carefully step around the small plants in the garden so you do not crush them. You have a good heart, Grika, and anyone who cannot see that is blind." Grika had felt hot tears pricking at her eyes, and she had turned away quickly, ashamed of such weakness. But Warren had gently touched her shoulder, and when she did not pull away, he had carefully turned her to face him. "There is no shame in tears," he had said quietly. "And there is no shame in wanting kindness. We all need it, orc and human alike." That had been the moment everything changed. Grika had looked into Warren's eyes and seen genuine affection there, and the last of her defenses had crumbled. She had let herself cry then, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body, and Warren had held her through it all, murmuring soft words of comfort that she could barely hear over her own weeping. When the storm had finally passed, Grika had felt hollowed out but somehow lighter. Warren had produced a handkerchief and gently wiped her face, his touch as tender as if she were made of spun glass. "Better?" he had asked. "I do not know," Grika had admitted. "Everything feels strange. Strange can be good," Warren had said. "Strange means different, and different means change. Change can be frightening, but it can also be wonderful." Over the following weeks, something had bloomed between them, fragile and precious. They still worked the farm together, but now there were lingering glances and accidental touches that felt less accidental each time. Warren began to invite Grika to eat dinner with him in the farmhouse, rather than bringing food to the barn, and they would spend long evenings talking by the fire, sharing stories of their pasts. Grika learned that Warren had grown up on this very farm, the youngest of 3 brothers. His older siblings had left to seek their fortunes in the larger towns, but Warren had loved the land too much to leave. He had married his childhood sweetheart, a girl named Mary who had grown up on the neighboring farm, and they had been happy despite the hard work and modest means. "She had the warmest laugh," Warren had said one night staring into the fire. "Like summer sunshine. When she died, I thought I would never feel warmth again." "But you do now?" Grika had asked hesitantly. Warren had turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze had stolen her breath. "Yes, I do now." Grika had shared her own history, speaking of her brutal upbringing and the rigid hierarchies of orc society. She told him about the raid and the child she had spared, and Warren had listened without judgment. "You did the right thing," he had said firmly. "That took more courage than any battle." "My father did not think so. He said I was weak and corrupted." "Your father was wrong. Mercy is not weakness. It is the hardest thing in the world, and it takes the strongest people to show it." Grika had felt something settle in her chest at those words, a sense of rightness that she had never experienced before. Warren's approval should not have mattered so much, but it did. It mattered more than anything. As autumn deepened and the first frosts began to touch the morning grass, Grika found herself thinking more and more about the future. She could not stay hidden on Warren's farm forever. Eventually, someone would discover her, and then both of their lives would be in danger. The sensible thing would be to leave, to disappear into the wilderness before she brought trouble to the man who had saved her life. But every time she tried to work up the courage to go, she would look at Warren, and the words would die in her throat. The thought of never seeing his gentle smile again, never hearing his soft voice, was unbearable. The decision was taken out of her hands on a crisp October morning, when a group of travelers stopped at Warren's farm asking for water and directions. Grika had been in the barn when they arrived, but she heard the commotion and peeked through a crack in the wall. There were 5 of them, rough-looking men on horseback with weapons at their sides. Warren had greeted them politely and offered them water from his well, as hospitality demanded. The men had accepted, but Grika could see the way they looked around the farm with calculating eyes, noting the healthy crops and well-maintained buildings. "You live here alone?" one of them had asked, a tall man with a scar across his cheek. "I manage," Warren had replied neutrally. "Seems like a lot of work for one man. You must be very industrious." "I do what needs doing." The men had exchanged glances, and Grika's warrior instincts had screamed danger. These were not honest travelers. These were raiders, scouting for easy targets. After the men left, Warren had come to the barn and found Grika already arming herself with the weapons she had kept hidden in the hay. "They will come back," she had said grimly. "Tonight or tomorrow night. Men like that always do." Warren had not argued. He had simply nodded and said, "Then we will be ready." They had spent the day preparing. Warren had an old sword that had belonged to his father, who had served in the territorial militia, and he cleaned and sharpened it with practiced movements that told Grika he knew how to use it. Grika checked her own weapons, a crude axe and a long knife, and together they fortified the farmhouse as best they could. The raiders had come that very night, just as Grika had predicted. There were 6 of them this time, one more than before, and they came with torches and weapons drawn. They expected an easy target, a lone farmer they could rob and probably kill before moving on to the next isolated homestead. What they found instead was a battle-ready orc warrior and a determined farmer who would not surrender his home without a fight. Grika had burst from the farmhouse with a roar that echoed across the fields, her axe already swinging. The raiders had frozen in shock at the sight of her, and that moment of hesitation cost them dearly. She had cut down the first man before he could even raise his sword, and the second fell to Warren's blade as he emerged from the house behind her. The remaining 4 had rallied quickly, surrounding them with the skill of experienced fighters. Grika and Warren had fought back to back, their movements synchronizing with surprising ease. Warren might not have had her raw strength, but he was fast and clever, using the terrain to his advantage. Grika protected his left side while he covered her right, and together they were formidable. The fight had been brutal and quick. One raider fell to Grika's knife, another to a devastating blow from her axe. Warren had wounded a third badly enough that he fled into the night, clutching his bleeding shoulder. The last 2 had looked at each other, looked at the bodies of their companions, and made the wise decision to run. When it was over, Grika and Warren had stood in the trampled yard, breathing hard and splattered with blood. The silence after the battle was deafening, broken only by their ragged breathing. "Are you hurt?" Warren had asked, and his first thought being for her safety had made something warm bloom in Grika's chest. "No, I am fine. You fought magnificently." Grika had looked at him, this gentle farmer who had just fought like a soldier to defend his home, and something inside her had shifted decisively. "We make a good team." "Yes," Warren had agreed, and the way he looked at her made her feel like the most precious thing in the world. "We do." They had buried the dead raiders the next morning, and Warren had ridden to the nearest settlement to report the attack. He had been careful to describe his defender as a hired hand who had already moved on, seeking work elsewhere. No one questioned his story too closely. Raiders were a constant problem on the frontier, and the locals were simply grateful that Warren had survived. When he returned to the farm, he had found Grika sitting on the porch of the farmhouse, staring out at the fields. She had moved her few belongings from the barn while he was gone, unable to bear the separation any longer. Warren had sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I did a lot of thinking on the ride back," he had said. "About what? About us. About what we are to each other." He had taken a deep breath. "Grika, I know this is complicated. I know there are 100 reasons why this cannot work, but I have to tell you the truth. I have fallen in love with you." Grika's heart had hammered in her chest. "Warren, I am an orc. Your people will never accept me. If anyone finds out, they will kill us both. I know the risks, but I have lived a safe life, and I have lost everything that mattered to me anyway. I would rather have one day of genuine happiness with you than a lifetime of lonely safety. You do not know what you are saying. You do not understand how hard it will be." Warren had taken her large, calloused hand in his smaller one. "Then help me understand, but do not ask me to give you up. I cannot do that. I will not." Grika had looked at their joined hands, her green skin so different from his pale human flesh, and yet they fit together perfectly. "I love you too," she had whispered. "I did not want to. I tried not to, but I do." "Then that is all that matters," Warren had said, and he had kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and Grika had felt like she was finally home. But Warren had been right about one thing. It was complicated. They could not simply announce their relationship to the world. The nearby settlements would never accept an orc, no matter how much she had helped defend against raiders. And there was always the danger that Grika's old clan might find her, or that other orcs would see her as a traitor for living with a human. They had decided to be cautious, to keep their relationship private while they figured out their next steps. Grika continued to stay hidden when visitors came to the farm, and Warren maintained the fiction that he lived alone. It was not ideal, but it kept them safe. Winter had arrived with heavy snows that isolated the farm even further. Grika and Warren spent long evenings by the fire, wrapped in blankets and in each other's arms. He taught her to read using his small collection of books, and she taught him some of the orc language, laughing at his clumsy pronunciation. "How do you say I love you in your language?" Warren had asked one night. "Thraxul Nor," Grika had said softly, "but it is more than that. It means you are my heart's home." "Thraxul Nor," Warren had repeated carefully, and even through his accent the words had been beautiful. It was during that winter that Grika first began to imagine a future. Not just surviving day to day, but actually building a life with Warren. She imagined them working the farm together, growing old side by side, perhaps even having children. The thought of little half-orc babies toddling around the farmhouse made her smile, even though she knew such dreams were dangerous. Spring had brought new challenges. The isolation of winter could not last forever, and as the snow melted and the roads became passable again, they knew they would have to make some decisions. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Warren had said something that changed everything. "I want to marry you." Grika had stared at him. "That is impossible. No priest would perform such a ceremony. No settlement would recognize it. Then we will make our own ceremony. We will speak our vows to each other in front of the land and the sky, and that will be enough." "Warren, think about what you are saying. If you marry me, you will be tied to an orc for the rest of your life. You will never be able to have a normal family, a normal life." "I do not want normal," Warren had said firmly. "I want you. Only you." Grika had felt tears threatening again, but this time they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Are you certain, truly certain, more certain than I have ever been about anything?" "Then yes," Grika had said, her voice trembling. "Yes, I will marry you." They had spent weeks planning their private ceremony. Warren had carved 2 simple rings from ash wood, and Grika had woven them decorations from wildflowers and herbs. They chose a spot at the edge of the forest, where the trees gave way to Warren's wheat fields, a place that represented both of their worlds coming together. On a warm day in late spring, they had dressed in their best clothes and walked to that spot hand in hand. There was no priest, no guests, just the 2 of them and their promises. Warren had gone first. "Grika, when I found you dying in my field, I did not know I was finding my future. You have brought joy back into my life, purpose back into my days. You are brave and strong and kind, and I am honored that you would choose to spend your life with me. I promise to always speak softly to you, to treat you with the gentleness you deserve, and to love you with everything I have, for all the days I am given." His words had undone her completely, and Grika had to wipe away tears before she could speak her own vows. "Warren, you showed me what kindness looks like. You taught me that I am worth more than my strength, that I deserve gentleness and care. You have been patient with me, understanding with me, and loving even when I did not know how to accept love. I promise to protect you, to work beside you, to be your partner in all things. You are my heart's home, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." They had exchanged their wooden rings, and Warren had kissed her with all the tenderness and passion in his soul. In that moment, Grika had felt like the luckiest being in the world, orc or human or anything else, but their happiness was not to last unchallenged. Word had somehow spread through the orc territories about an exile living with a human, and Grika's old clan saw it as a stain on their honor. If she had simply disappeared into the wilderness to die, that would have been acceptable. But to thrive, to find happiness, to live openly with a human, that was an insult they could not ignore. They had come in the summer, a war party of 12 warriors led by Grika's own father. Warren and Grika had been working in the garden when they appeared at the edge of the property, armed and armored for battle. Grika's father, a massive orc named Grathak, had stepped forward. His voice had been like grinding stones. "You have brought shame to our clan, daughter. This dishonor must be cleansed with blood." Grika had stepped in front of Warren protectively. "I am no longer your daughter. You cast me out, remember? My life is my own now. Your life has always belonged to the clan. You are simply too weak to understand that." "No," Grika had said firmly. "I was weak when I let you and the others convince me that strength meant cruelty. I am stronger now than I ever was in your clan." Grathak had looked at Warren with undisguised contempt. "This is what makes you strong, a soft human who knows nothing of battle." Warren had stepped up beside Grika, despite her attempt to keep him behind her. "I know enough, and I know that your daughter is worth 100 warriors like you, who only understand violence." Several of the war party had growled at this insult, reaching for their weapons. But Grathak had held up a hand to stop them. "You dare speak to me this way, human?" "I dare," Warren had said steadily. "And I will do more than speak if you threaten my wife." The word wife had caused a ripple of shock through the war party. Grathak's face had twisted with rage. "You married this human. You have truly fallen beyond redemption." "I have risen beyond your narrow understanding," Grika had countered. "I have found love and peace and purpose. I have found a partner who respects me, who values me for more than my skill with a blade. What have you found, father?" More battles, more scars, more empty victories. For just a moment, something had flickered in Grathak's eyes, something that might have been doubt or pain. But then it was gone, replaced by cold determination. "If you will not return to face justice, then you will die here, both of you." The war party had advanced, and Grika and Warren had fallen into their fighting stance, back to back, just as they had been against the raiders. But this was different. These were trained orc warriors, each one a match for Grika in strength and skill. The odds were impossible. They had fought anyway, because surrender was not an option. Grika's axe had sung through the air, and Warren's sword had flashed in the sunlight. They had wounded 3 of the attackers before being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Grika had felt rough hands grabbing her arms, pulling her away from Warren. She had screamed and struggled, but there were too many of them. Warren had been forced to his knees, a blade at his throat. Grathak had approached his daughter, his face unreadable. "You fight well, but you fight for the wrong reasons. Love has made you foolish." "Love has made me wise," Grika had gasped, still struggling against the warriors who held her. "It has shown me that there is more to life than your endless cycle of violence. Then you will die for that wisdom." But before Grathak could give the order to execute them, a voice had rung out across the farm. "Stop this at once." Everyone had turned to see an elderly orc woman emerging from the tree line. She was small for an orc, bent with age, but she carried herself with undeniable authority. The war party had immediately released Grika and stepped back, and even Grathak had looked uncertain. "Mother," he had said, and there was surprise in his voice. "Why are you here?" "Because I heard that my foolish son was about to make a terrible mistake," the old woman had replied. She had walked slowly across the farm, leaning on a gnarled walking stick, and the warriors had parted before her like water. This was Earthka, Grika's grandmother and the former chieftain of the Blacktooth clan. She had stepped down from leadership 10 years ago, passing the mantle to her son, but she was still deeply respected. Earthka had looked at Grika with sharp, intelligent eyes. "So, you are the granddaughter who chose mercy over murder. I have been curious about you." "Grandmother," Grika had said, bowing her head respectfully, "I did not expect to see you again. I imagine not. Tell me, child, is it true that you married this human?" "Yes. His name is Warren Redfield, and he is my husband." Earthka had turned her gaze to Warren, who had climbed to his feet but kept his sword ready. "You are the one who showed my granddaughter kindness when her own family cast her out." "I am," Warren had said steadily, meeting her eyes without flinching. "And you love her, truly, with all my heart." The old orc had studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you." She had turned back to her son. "Grathak, you were always too rigid in your thinking. You see the world in terms of strength and weakness, orc and human, honor and shame. But you have forgotten the old ways, the true ways." "Mother, she violated every law of our people," Grathak had protested. "She followed a higher law, the law of compassion. Did you know that our people long ago were not always warriors? We built cities, created art, lived in peace with many other races. It was only after we were driven from our ancestral lands by human expansion that we became what we are now. We adapted to survive, but in doing so, we lost much of what made us great. This history had clearly surprised many of the warriors, Grathak included. Earthka had continued, her voice growing stronger. Grika has not dishonored our clan. She has remembered what we forgot. She has shown that orcs are capable of more than violence. And if she can find happiness with a human who treats her well, then she should be celebrated, not condemned. But the other clans will mock us, Grathak had argued, though his conviction seemed to be wavering. Let them mock. We will know the truth. And perhaps in time others will see what Grika has shown us, that there is another way forward. There had been a long, tense silence. Finally, Grathak had sheathed his weapon. You are the wise one, Mother. If you say we should spare them, then we will spare them. Earthka had smiled. I say more than that. I say we should apologize to them and leave them in peace. Grathak had looked uncomfortable, but he had turned to Grika and Warren. You will not be hunted by our clan. You have my word. It was not an apology, but it was more than Grika had dared hope for. Warren had squeezed her hand, and she had felt relief wash over her. The war party had departed, but Earthka had remained behind. She had asked to see the farm, and Warren and Grika had given her a tour, showing her the fields and the animals and the small home they shared. You have built a good life here, Earthka had said approvingly. You should be proud. Thank you, grandmother, Grika had said, her voice thick with emotion. The old orc had placed a weathered hand on Grika's cheek. I am sorry your father could not see your strength. I am sorry I did not intervene sooner, but I am glad you found your own path. I had help, Grika had said, looking at Warren. Earthka had smiled. The best paths are never walked alone. She had turned to Warren. You take care of my granddaughter, human. She is precious. I know, Warren had said seriously, and I will, I promise. Before she left, Earthka had given them a gift, a beautifully woven blanket in the traditional orc style, decorated with symbols of blessing and protection. For your home, she had said, may it be filled with warmth and love. After Earthka had gone, Grika and Warren had stood together in their farmyard, holding each other tight. The danger had passed, and for the first time since they had met, they could imagine a future without constantly looking over their shoulders. We are really free, Grika had whispered. We are, Warren had agreed. We can live our lives the way we choose. And that is exactly what they had done. Summer had turned to autumn and autumn to winter again, and through it all they had built their life together. They worked the farm, expanding the fields and adding more animals. Warren taught Grika more about reading and writing, and she proved to be a quick learner, soon devouring every book he owned. They had their challenges, of course. There were still occasional visitors who reacted with fear or hostility to Grika's presence. But Warren always stood firm, making it clear that his wife was not a threat. Slowly, word spread through the region about the orc woman who lived peacefully with her human husband, and while some remained suspicious, others became curious. A young couple from a nearby farm had been the first to visit intentionally, bringing fresh bread as a welcoming gift. The wife, a woman named Sarah, had been nervous but determined to be friendly. I heard you helped Warren fight off raiders last year, she had said to Grika. That took courage. Warren fought too, Grika had replied. We protected our home together. Sarah had smiled. That is how it should be. Partners supporting each other. It had been a small moment, but it had meant the world to Grika. It was the first time a human other than Warren had looked at her and seen a person rather than a monster. More visits had followed, and gradually, Grika and Warren had built connections with their neighbors. Not everyone approved of their relationship, but enough people were willing to give them a chance that they no longer felt completely isolated. In the spring following their confrontation with the Blacktooth War Party, Grika had discovered she was pregnant. The realization had filled her with a complex mixture of joy and terror. She had no idea what to expect from a half-orc, half-human pregnancy, and there was no one she could ask for advice. Warren had been thrilled despite his own concerns. "We will figure it out together," he had said, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Just like we figure out everything else." The pregnancy had been difficult. Grika's body had struggled with the mixed heritage of the child, and there had been times when she feared she would lose the baby. But with Warren's constant support and the help of a midwife from the nearest settlement who proved to be more open-minded than expected, Grika had carried the child to term. Their daughter had been born on a clear winter morning, arriving with a lusty cry that had filled the farmhouse with joy. She had her mother's green skin and pointed ears, but her father's gray eyes and softer features. They had named her Willa, meaning determined protector. And from the moment Grika held her, she had known that every struggle, every hardship had been worth it. Warren had cried when he held his daughter for the first time, tears of pure happiness streaming down his face. "She is perfect," he had whispered. "Absolutely perfect." Watching Warren with their daughter had given Grika a contentment she had never imagined possible. He was gentle and patient, singing soft lullabies and pacing the floor during long nights when Willa would not sleep. He changed diapers without complaint and marveled at every tiny milestone. "Look, she gripped my finger," he would say with wonder. "Did you see how strong she is?" "She gets that from me," Grika had teased. "She gets her beauty from you too," Warren had replied seriously. And even after all their time together, compliments like that still made Grika's heart flutter. As Willa grew, it became clear that she had inherited the best of both her parents. She was strong and quick like her mother, but gentle and thoughtful like her father. The neighboring children, after initial shyness, accepted her as one of their own, and Grika often watched with amazement as her daughter played with human children without a trace of the prejudice that had marked Grika's own childhood. "Things are changing," Warren had observed one day as they watched Willa chase butterflies with a little human boy from the next farm over. "Slowly, perhaps, but changing." "Because of her?" Grika had asked. "Because of you? Because you had the courage to choose a different path?" "Willa is just continuing what you started." Grika had leaned into her husband, feeling his warmth and strength. "We started it together." "Together," Warren had agreed, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. As the years passed, more changes came to the frontier. The occasional orc trader or traveler began to appear in the settlements, seeking peaceful commerce rather than conflict. Grika suspected her grandmother, Earthka, had something to do with this shift, using her influence to encourage other clans to explore alternatives to their traditional raiding lifestyle. One day, when Willa was 3 years old, Earthka herself had visited again. She was even more frail than before, but her eyes were still sharp and bright. She had sat by the fire, holding her great-granddaughter and telling her stories of the old orc kingdoms before the wars and the exile. "You are the future," she had told Willa, though the child was too young to fully understand. "You and others like you. You will build bridges that we have burned." Grika had felt a swell of emotion watching her grandmother with her daughter. This was everything she had never known she wanted, generations of her family together in peace and love. Before Earthka left that time, she had pulled Grika aside. "I am proud of you, granddaughter. You were braver than any warrior I have ever known." "I was just trying to survive," Grika had said. "No, you were trying to live. There is a difference." Earthka had squeezed her hand. "I do not think I will see you again in this world. My time is short, but I want you to know that you have brought honor to our family in ways I never expected. You have shown us that strength comes in many forms." Grika had embraced her grandmother then, feeling the fragile bones beneath the weathered skin, and she had cried, "Thank you for saving us. Thank you for understanding. Thank your husband," Earthka had said. "He saw your worth when the rest of us were blind. That is the mark of a truly wise man." Earthka had passed away that winter, and word had reached them through orc traders. Grika had mourned in the traditional way, spending 3 days in silence and reflection. Warren had respected her grief, caring for Willa and keeping the household running while his wife processed her loss. On the 3rd day, Grika had emerged from her mourning and found Warren waiting with open arms. She had held him tight, drawing strength from his solid presence. "She believed in us," Grika had said. "She believed that what we have is important." "It is important," Warren had replied. "Not just for us, but for everyone who comes after. We are proving that different peoples can live together in peace and love. That is a powerful thing." As Willa grew older, she became increasingly curious about both sides of her heritage. Warren taught her to farm and to read, while Grika taught her the orc language and the traditional crafts she remembered from her youth. The girl absorbed it all with eager enthusiasm, proud of her mixed heritage rather than ashamed of it. One evening, when Willa was 5, she had asked the question that Grika had been both expecting and dreading. "Mama, why do some people look at me funny when we go to the settlement?" Grika had exchanged a glance with Warren before answering carefully. "Because you are special, my heart. You are half orc and half human, and some people are not used to that." "Does it make me bad?" "No," Warren had said firmly. "It makes you unique and wonderful. Some people fear what they do not understand, but that is their problem, not yours." "I like being different," Willa had declared with a child's simple confidence. "I can do things other kids cannot do. I am stronger and I can hear better." Grika had smiled at her daughter's pride. "Yes, you can, and you should be proud of your strength. But remember, true strength is not just about being physically powerful. It is about being kind, being brave enough to stand up for what is right, and being gentle with those who need gentleness. Like how Papa is gentle with the baby chickens." "Exactly like that," Warren had said, pulling his daughter into his lap. "Being strong means knowing when to fight and when to show mercy." These were the lessons they taught their daughter, day by day, moment by moment. And as Willa grew, it became clear that she understood them in her bones. When Willa was 6, a new family had moved into the area, refugees from a settlement that had been destroyed by a particularly vicious orc raid. The mother, a widow named Helen, had been understandably terrified when she learned about Grika. But her son, a boy about Willa's age named Thomas, had befriended Willa before his mother could stop him. Helen had come to the farm in a panic, ready to drag her son away from the dangerous orc. But she had arrived to find Willa and Thomas carefully tending to a baby bird that had fallen from its nest, working together to build it a safe place to recover. "We have to be very gentle," Willa had been explaining to Thomas. "Birds are fragile. Mama says that being strong means protecting fragile things." Helen had stopped in her tracks, watching her son and this half-orc child working together with such care and concentration. Warren had approached her quietly. "They are just children," he had said softly, "playing and learning together." "Is that not what all children should do?" Helen had looked at him, then at the children, then back at him. "I lost my husband to an orc raid. I saw terrible things. I know, and I am sorry for your loss, but Grika is not the orc who hurt your family. She is a person who has suffered too, who was cast out by her own people for showing mercy. She is my wife, and she is a good mother. All we ask is a chance to be good neighbors." It had taken time, but Helen had eventually warmed to them. The turning point had come when Willa had used her orc strength to help Thomas carry firewood to his house, cheerfully making multiple trips without complaint. Helen had seen the kindness in the action, and it had begun to crack the wall around her heart. "Thank you," she had said to Willa, and the little girl had beamed. "You are welcome, Miss Helen. Mama says neighbors help each other." By the time Willa was 8, she had become something of a local legend. She was the little half-orc girl who helped with the harvest, who carried heavy loads for the elderly, who always had a kind word and a ready smile. The children adored her, and even the most prejudiced adults had to admit that she was a good child. Grika and Warren watched their daughters' growing acceptance with pride and hope. The world was still not perfect, but it was better than it had been. And every day, it seemed to get a little bit better still. One summer evening, the whole community had gathered for a harvest festival. It was the first time Grika had been invited to a community event, and she had been nervous about attending. But Warren had held her hand and Willa had tugged on her other arm with excitement, and together they had gone. At first, there had been some awkward stares and whispered conversations. But then someone had asked Grika to help move some heavy tables, and she had done so easily, her strength making the task simple. Someone else had complimented Warren on his beautiful family, and Willa had run off to play with the other children, her laughter ringing across the field. As the evening wore on, people had begun to approach Grika with tentative questions about orc culture, about her life before she came to the farm, about how she and Warren had fallen in love. She answered honestly, and slowly, the walls of fear and misunderstanding had begun to crumble. By the end of the night, Grika had found herself sitting with a group of women, sharing stories and advice about children and farming and life. It was such a normal, ordinary moment, and yet it meant everything. Warren had found her there and smiled, seeing his wife finally being accepted as the person she had always been. When the festival ended and they walked home under the stars, Willa asleep on Warren's shoulders, Grika had felt a profound sense of peace. "This is what I dreamed of," she had said softly. "When I first realized I loved you, I dreamed that maybe someday we could have this. A family, a community, a place to belong." "You always belonged," Warren had said. "Right here with me." But Grika had shaken her head. "No, you do not understand. I spent my whole life not belonging anywhere. Not in my clan, not in the world. But now I belong here. I am Grika Redfield, wife and mother and neighbor and friend. I am not just an orc or just a warrior or just an exile. I am all of me, and that is enough." Warren had stopped walking and pulled her into a kiss, careful not to jostle their sleeping daughter. "It is more than enough. It is everything." As the years continued to pass, their family grew. They had 2 more children, a son named William who had his father's brown hair but his mother's strength, and another daughter named Daisy who was almost entirely human in appearance, except for the faint green tinge to her skin in certain lights. Each child was unique, each a perfect blend of their parents in different ways, and each was raised with the same lessons about kindness, strength, mercy, and love. The farm prospered under their joint care. Warren's patient farming knowledge combined with Grika's tireless strength created a productive homestead that became a model for others in the region. They took on apprentices sometimes, young people from both human and orc communities who wanted to learn their methods. One of these apprentices was a young orc woman named Kesh, who had been cast out by her clan for refusing an arranged marriage. She had arrived at the farm angry and bitter, but Grika and Warren's gentle example had slowly softened her rough edges. She eventually married a human farmer's son from the next valley over, and their wedding was attended by both orcs and humans, a sight that would have been unthinkable just a few years before. "You did this," Kesh had said to Grika at the wedding. "You showed us it was possible." "No," Grika had replied. You did this. I just lived my life. You were brave enough to follow your own path. But even as things improved, there were still difficulties. Not everyone accepted the changes, and there were incidents of violence and prejudice that reminded them the world was not yet fully healed. When Willa was 12, a group of human extremists had attacked a small orc trading post that had been established near the border between human and orc territories. Several orcs had been killed, and the fragile peace that had been building was threatened. Grika had been devastated by the news, and Warren had held her as she wept for the victims. But they had both known that hiding from the problem would not help. They had to be part of the solution. Together with other like-minded families, both human and orc, they had organized a memorial service for the victims. It was a simple ceremony, held at the border between the territories, with speakers from both communities. Grika had spoken about her own journey from exile to belonging, and Warren had spoken about the power of choosing understanding over fear. "We can build a better world," Warren had said to the assembled crowd, "but only if we are willing to see each other as people rather than enemies. My wife taught me that. My children embody that truth, and every day I see more examples of orcs and humans finding common ground." The memorial had not solved everything, but it had been a start. It had shown both communities that there were people willing to stand up for peace and mutual respect. As Willa entered her teenage years, she began to take a more active role in bridging the communities. She organized gatherings where young people from both races could meet and socialize. She taught orc children to read and write in the human language, and she taught human children basic phrases in the orc tongue. "You are doing important work," Grika had told her daughter one evening as they prepared dinner together. "I am just doing what you and Papa taught me," Willa had replied. That everyone deserves kindness and respect. Grika had felt her eyes water with pride. Her daughter had never known the harsh, brutal world that Grika had grown up in. She had been raised with love and gentleness, and she was passing those gifts forward to others. When Willa was 15, she had asked her parents about their early days together. "What was it like when you first met? Was it love at first sight?" Warren and Grika had exchanged amused glances. "Not exactly," Warren had said. "Your mother was unconscious when I found her, and when she woke up, she looked like she wanted to either kill me or run away. I did not know what to make of him," Grika had admitted. "No one had ever been kind to me before. I thought he must want something from me, that there must be a trick or a trap." "What changed your mind?" Willa had asked, leaning forward with interest. Grika had looked at Warren, remembering those early days with crystal clarity. "He was patient. He never demanded anything. He just kept being kind day after day until I started to believe it was real. And then, slowly, I started to care about him. Not because he expected it, but because I could not help it." "Your mother is braver than any warrior I have ever known," Warren had added. "She risked everything to give me a chance. She opened her heart even though she had every reason to keep it closed. That takes real courage." "I love you both," Willa had said simply, and she had hugged them both tight. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile, Grika thought. These simple, precious moments of family and love. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Warren had surprised Grika with a gift. He had carved a beautiful wooden box, decorated with intricate designs that blended human and orc artistic traditions. Inside the box were 20 wooden tokens, each one carved with a symbol representing a year of their marriage. "This one is for the year we met," Warren had explained, showing her a token carved with a wheat sheaf. "This one is for the year Willa was born." That token showed a small baby. "This one is for the year we attended our first harvest festival together." That one showed a group of people gathered around a fire. Grika had examined each token, tears streaming down her face as she remembered each year, each milestone, each challenge they had overcome together. "You have given me a life I never dreamed possible," she had said. "You have given me love and family and belonging. How can I ever thank you?" "You thank me every day," Warren had said, his own eyes damp. "Every time you smile at me, every time you hold my hand, every time you wake up beside me. You are my greatest gift, Grika. You always have been." They had renewed their vows that day, standing in the same spot where they had first married 20 years before. But this time, they were not alone. Their children stood with them, along with friends and neighbors from both the human and orc communities. It was a celebration not just of their love, but of everything they had built together. As Grika looked around at the assembled crowd, seeing humans and orcs standing side by side, some of them with half-orc children of their own, she felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond anything she could have achieved as a warrior. "We did this," she had whispered to Warren. "We did," he had agreed, "and it is just the beginning." The years that followed were rich and full. Willa eventually married a young man she had met at one of her cultural exchange gatherings, a kind human boy who looked at her with the same adoration Warren had always shown Grika. William followed in his father's footsteps as a farmer, taking over more and more of the daily operations as Warren aged. Daisy surprised everyone by showing a talent for healing, apprenticing herself to the local midwife, and becoming known for her skill and compassion. Grika and Warren grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies showing the marks of decades of hard work. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper and stronger with each passing year. They spent their later years mostly on the farm, content to let the younger generation take on more of the heavy labor. They became grandparents several times over, and there was nothing Grika loved more than sitting on the porch with Warren, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. One spring morning, when they were both well into their 60s, Warren had taken Grika's hand as they sat watching the sunrise. "You remember what you said to me that first time you broke down and cried?" he had asked. Grika had nodded. "I said that no one had ever spoken soft to me." "That broke my heart," Warren had admitted. "The thought that you had gone your whole life without gentleness. I made a promise to myself that day that I would spend the rest of my life making up for all those years of harshness." "You did more than that," Grika had said, squeezing his hand. "You taught me how to be gentle with myself. You showed me that I deserved love and kindness. You gave me a family and a home and a reason to believe in goodness." "We gave each other all of those things," Warren had corrected gently. "This was never just about what I gave you. You gave me purpose after I had lost everything. You brought joy back into my life. You showed me what real courage looks like." They had sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Finally, Grika had spoken again. "If I could go back and tell that frightened, desperate orc woman who collapsed in your wheat field how her life would turn out, she would never believe me. She would never believe that she could be this happy, this content, this loved." "Then it is good we do not need to convince her," Warren had said with a smile. "We just get to live it." And live it they did for many more years. They watched their children thrive and their grandchildren grow. They saw the communities around them continue to evolve, with more and more humans and orcs finding common ground and even love, just as they had. When Warren finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Grika mourned him deeply, but without regret. They had had 50 wonderful years together, years filled with more love and happiness than she had ever thought possible. He had died in his own bed, surrounded by family, having lived a long and meaningful life. At his funeral, which was attended by hundreds of people from both human and orc communities, Grika spoke about the man who had changed her life with simple acts of kindness. "My husband taught me that speaking softly is not weakness," she said, her voice strong despite her grief. "He taught me that gentleness is its own kind of strength. He showed me that love can bridge any divide, overcome any obstacle, heal any wound. He was the best man I have ever known, and I will carry him in my heart until we meet again." Grika lived for another 10 years after Warren's death, cared for lovingly by her children and grandchildren. She spent those years sharing her story with anyone who would listen, hoping that others might learn from her journey. She passed away quietly one winter night, surrounded by 3 generations of her family. Her last words were in the orc language spoken to her eldest granddaughter. "Thraxul Nor," she whispered. "You are my heart's home, all of you." At Grika's funeral, held at the same spot where she and Warren had exchanged their vows so many years before, her children and grandchildren spoke about her legacy. They talked about her strength, her courage, her kindness. But most of all, they talked about the love she and Warren had shared, a love that had changed not just their own lives but the lives of countless others. "My mother and father proved that love is stronger than fear," Willa said, now a mature woman with children and grandchildren of her own. "They showed us that what makes us different can also bring us together. Their story is our story, and we carry it forward every day." And carry it forward they did. The Redfield family became known throughout the region as peacemakers and bridge builders. The farm remained in the family for generations, a symbol of what could be achieved when people chose understanding over hatred. Years later, historians would point to Grika and Warren as pivotal figures in the reconciliation between humans and orcs. Their simple love story, built on kindness and mutual respect, had rippled outward in ways they could never have imagined, inspiring others to question their prejudices and seek connection across traditional boundaries. But perhaps the most important legacy they left was not in the big changes they inspired, but in the small, everyday miracles. In the orc children who grew up expecting kindness rather than cruelty. In the human children who learned that different did not mean dangerous. In the countless couples, both same race and mixed, who found the courage to love openly because Grika and Warren had shown them it was possible. The story of the orc bride who tasted kindness for the first time became a legend, told and retold across generations. But for those who had known them, Grika and Warren were not legends. They were just 2 people who had loved each other deeply, treated each other gently, and built a beautiful life together from the ashes of loss and exile. And in the end, that was more than enough. That was everything. The wooden box Warren had carved for their 20th anniversary still existed generations later, carefully preserved by the family. Inside were not just the original 20 tokens, but many more, added by Grika during the years after Warren's death. Tokens for every grandchild born, for every bridge built between communities, for every small victory in the ongoing work of peace. And on the very bottom of the box, beneath all the other tokens, was a simple carved wheat sheaf, the first token Warren had made. On the back of it, in careful letters that Warren had taught Grika to write, was a single phrase: "No one ever spoke soft to me until you." It was a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come, a testament to the power of simple kindness to transform lives and change the world. And so the story ended as all the best stories do, not with a dramatic flourish but with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, a love well earned, and a legacy that would endure long after the storytellers themselves had passed into memory and then into legend. Grika and Warren Redfield had found each other against all odds, loved each other despite all obstacles, and built something beautiful that would outlast them both. In a world often cruel and harsh, they had created a pocket of gentleness and warmth that spread like ripples on a pond, touching shores they would never see. That was their gift to each other and to the world. That was their triumph. That was their happily ever after.